Hello everyone. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss the 7-stage cycle of teaching speaking, and in the second part of the presentation, I will discuss metacognition. The references that I'm going to use are these two primarily. Go and Burns book chapter, which is entitled A Model for Teaching Speaking, which was published in a book called Teaching Speaking, a Holistic Approach in 2012. In addition, since this presentation is about speaking and it would be useful for us to know the current status of research in this field, I suggest that you take a look at this paper published by McCarthy and O'Keefe in annual reviews, but in the annual review of applied linguistics. So let's get started with the 7-stage cycle of teaching speaking. Go and Burns have a very interesting statement which I wanted to quote here and talk about it for a little bit before I get down to the main subject, which is the 7-stage cycle. And this is about cognitive processes in speaking. They say that understanding the key mental processes speakers engage in can help us support learners in their speaking development in a more informed manner. I've highlighted the phrase key mental processes, and I want to say a few words about it. Mainly in second language teaching and publications, when we talk about mental processes, we specifically refer to those processes about which the learners are aware and conscious. Now, if you compare the range of processes about which we are aware with those about which we're not aware, you'll see that there is a significant difference because we're not conscious about a lot of mental processes that are happening as we are engaged in a cognitive process. On the other hand, we're only aware of a very small proportion of mental processes that happen. So here, when we say the key mental processes, we specifically refer to those that about which we or language learners are aware. And I should say this is unfortunate because for a long time, since decades ago, the field of second language learning and even second language assessment has always been involved in investigating those mental processes that learners can talk about and verbalize. This is just a critique of the field at this point. I don't want to delve into this more than this, but just wanted to mention that what we mean by the key mental processes are only those about which our second language learners are aware. So with this in mind, let's get started with speaking competencies first, and then use the ideas that we get from this slide to talk about the 7-stage cycle. So Go and Burns talk about three types of competencies in speaking. One of them is knowledge, right on top of this triangle. Knowledge of language and discourse. The second one is core speaking skills, and the third one is communicative strategies. By knowledge of language and discourse, we mean grammatical knowledge, phonology, lexis, which refers to the knowledge of vocabulary, and discourse knowledge. That's the knowledge of the macrostructure of texts. By the way, in the same book, there is a wonderful chapter, which I will discuss in the future, which discusses different kinds of spoken genres. So if you're looking for a good resource that disseminates very useful information about the macrostructures of verbal genres, I highly recommend that chapter in Go and Burns. About core speaking skills, it's basically the operationalization or the activation of those types of knowledges that I mentioned above in your speaking. And it refers to pronunciation, speech functions, interaction management, and discourse organization. And I've talked about speech functions in another video at some detail. It actually refers to the way that you deliver your ideas in a communication, and it could include things like statements, questions, commands, offers, and things like that. Now, interaction management also overlaps with communicative strategies and refers to those kind of management skills that we have to initiate, to maintain, and end a conversation. Not only a conversation, but also other types of genres like oral presentations or public speeches or addresses. And then the knowledge, the ability to create organization in discourse. I've also talked about this in a previous video, so please watch the previous videos if you haven't watched them. Then they provide some information about what I mean by discourse organization. Now, communicative strategies refer to those strategies that help us prevent the breakdown of communication. There are two types of them. One is cognitive and the other type is metacognitive. Cognitive strategies refer to our ability to paraphrase, to approximate a concept. For example, we don't know the name of a bird that has the ability to talk, those talking birds. For example, a parrot or a parakeet or a myna bird. Then we use a word that is close to that. For example, say, oh, the kind of talking bird or a bird that can talk. I don't know the name, but it's a bird that can talk. It's an approximation. Using formulaic language, things like idioms, expressions, or other formulaic language to negotiate meaning when we don't understand the meaning or we cannot convey the meaning clearly, either as a listener or a speaker. Then we start to speak about the meaning of a concept, the meaning of something that we articulate. And together with another interlocutor, we try to clarify the meaning of what is being talked about. Providing examples is exemplification. Instead of talking about the concept in details, you can provide several examples to approximate what you mean, what you have in mind. Confirmation is sometimes is a strategy that you sometimes ask or try to get clarifications from the person who is listening to your speech or to your words. For example, you say, oh yeah, I understand it, or no, I don't understand. So through saying, yes, I understand it, he or she is confirming what you're talking about. Repetition is, well, it's obvious. You repeat what you have said just to make sure that the person who is listening to you has understood it. And then clarification is a strategy where you try to clarify through different ways. So it's like an overarching terminology that could include any of the previous communicative strategies that I've been talking about. And then assistance, which is usually provided by the interlocutor or the listener to the speaker so that the communication doesn't break down. Now, so let's keep these three in mind: skills, strategies, and knowledge of language and discourse, and see how they can help us through this teaching cycle. There are 7 stages here. In this slide, I just present an overview of those 7 stages. We start from the one right in top. This is the first stage, in which we basically try to get students or learners focus and attention on speaking through doing some tasks which I'll go through in a minute. In the second stage, we provide, as a teacher, we provide input or guide the planning of that speaking activity, followed by the third stage in which we conduct the speaking task. And then during this, the fourth stage, right here at the bottom, around 5 o'clock here, is where we focus on language skills and strategies, and we provide a lot of information about the sort of language skills that the students are supposed to focus on. And then we repeat the same task, the task which was done in stage 3. And following this, we direct learners' reflection on their own learning. We engage them in some kind of metacognitive thinking and metacognition. And in the last stage, stage 7, we try to facilitate and provide feedback on their learning, and also to engage them in providing some peer kind of feedback or self appraisal. This is also another example of metacognitive thinking. Now, what I would like to add to this 7-stage cycle of teaching is that when we teach new vocabulary or grammar, we're actually changing the brain in some way, the brain of our students. So it's really a very important thing for us to remember that good teachers also think about the neurocognitive aspects of their teaching. For example, here is just one of the many examples that I could provide. I like this because it's quite clear, simple, and straightforward. I got this from a publication by Shabani and the colleagues, published in 2013. They're talking about a motor semantic neural circuit for action language comprehension. A neural circuit is actually an interconnection, or let's say a population of interconnected neurons to carry out a specific function when they're activated. So those gray dots or gray circles here represent one neural circuit, and as I said, a neural circuit consists of a large number or a population of interconnected cells. So we have quite a few neural circuits here, and they function together when they're activated. And also we have another circuit here right on top. These are located on the parietal cortex, which is right on top of the head, so to speak. And these guys right here are located in the left hemisphere, which are associated with language activities. So when language activity circuits co-function together with those circuits that are on in the parietal cortex, which actually is one place for it's also referred to as the motor cortex. Together, they create a motor semantic neural circuit for action language comprehension. Now, for example, if you are teaching action language comprehension, for example, like you're teaching something about running, jogging, swimming, or anything that has to do with action, what we expect to be doing here is that to engage these parts of the brains of the language learners. So if language learners are not familiar with the concepts you're talking about or the words that you're trying to teach them, because it's second language, what is happening in the brain is that the brain starts to create connection between the words that they hear and also the functions that are already stored in the motor cortex. So through this, you will be creating new connections. You will be helping students to create new connections in their brain, which means that the teachers of any languages actually do have the power and exercise that power in the class to change the brain of their students. This is due to a capacity or capability of the brain which is called neuroplasticity, which is brain's ability to change, reshape, and reform itself throughout our lifetime. This is a very important concept, I think, and also interesting to remember when we are teaching things. So through this cycle, we're planning to teach students new language skills. Another way of looking at what we're doing is basically the neurocognitive dimension of it, in which we are basically reshaping the brain of our students in some ways. So let's get started with the first stage of this 7-stage cycle, in which we focus learners' attention on speaking. Now, I have written 10 minutes for this task. It's just a recommendation. You might feel that you need more time or less time. For example, your learners are advanced learners, so you don't have to spend too much time on this stage, but you prefer to focus more on stage 2 rather than stage 1. So you can just spend a few minutes on this. Some of the activities that you could do here or engage students in doing in order to make this more meaningful and useful is to, for example, create a video for them on the topic that you want to teach, or to ask them to go through the internet and browse, for example, YouTube, to find some useful videos. In some places where students do not have access to YouTube, I'm sure that you can find a way to allow them to use and have access to useful videos, or require them to do some research. It doesn't have to be video. They can read a text or something, as long as you help them to raise their awareness and to gather some knowledge about the topic that they want to talk about. It should be fine.